It's not like we had a shining light moment where where the world just changed overnight.
More and more carriers getting comfortable with indexing and approaching indexing on more favorable terms.
How much emphasis you actually put on getting that data right is the legacy of it.
It's an evolutionary process.
There's been a natural development. The customer,
Do you see that happening in our industry?
right or wrong, doesn't matter. It's the rules of the game, and we should follow them jointly.
Hello and welcome to the Freight Debate, the ultimate destination for supply chain professionals, logistics leaders, and anyone who has ever wondered what keeps the world moving. My name is Rajesh, and we are hosting another episode on indexing. With me, I have got Mads Drejer, who is the Chief Customer Officer and Chief Operating Officer with Can Global Logistics. Welcome to the podcast, Mads.
Thank you very much, Rajesh, and happy to be here.
With over 20 years of experience in the freight forwarding industry, Mads has seen it all the disruptions, consolidations, and new companies, new approaches to the business. And he has been in the forefront of innovations in product and data-driven decision making within the industry. We will learn from his experience with indexing, the unique challenges freight forwarders face today in the industry. We'll learn from him how Scan Global is approaching to solve these challenges and how they're approaching indexing as a construct in the contract. Welcome, Matt. Let's jump into it straight away. And I want to start a bit. What are the challenges that the industry is facing today, especially from a freight forwarder's point of view, and how these are different from the time when you started in the industry?
Yeah, I think back when I started, you had something called the freight conferences, and essentially, I think today probably some would say that was more or less the cartel, but at least it was a regulated environment where rates and at least surcharges were set in a more defined manner. So I think the big change is that that rate levels and surcharges were much more stable. If I go all the way back to my early days, today. It's constant volatility, and obviously you have two sides of the table. Our customers that wants stability, but of course at the same time cannot afford to overpay compared to market. And you can say those two factors always that's a little bit of a tug war always, I would say. So I think the volatility is obviously the largest difference today when we look at it. Whatever crystal ball we thought we had at the start of this year, as an example, did not really turn out the way we anticipated. And I think you can basically go many years back, and the normal supply and demand equation is essentially gone.
That's interesting, and it kind of puts you in a unique position because since you're in the middle of shippers or the carriers who are asset owners versus the buyers, and there is a theory that the freight forwarders are getting squeezed from both sides.
Whether it's a good position or not, it probably depends. But yes, of course we are getting squeezed. But I would also like to see our role as us absorbing risk on behalf of our customers. And conversely, from a carrier perspective, I would like to think that we offer them some stability in terms of volumes, because we all know that different customers have different fluctuations in volumes, and obviously when we add it all up, our volume, we are able to commit a more stable volume to the carrier. So there's always been many speculations on freight forwarders and the role of a freight forwarder, but I think if you look across most freight forwarders, they are, despite current times, doing rather well, and we offer a very meaningful role in the industry still today, both in terms of rates and absorbing risk, but also offering stability.
That sets up really well for the next part of our discussion, right? We are talking about disruptions which have become more frequent in the recent years. Scale of rate changes, be it surcharges, be it disruption-related charges, they are much bigger now compared to past. Like what used to be a few $100s of change over a period of few months can be a few $1,000s of change over a period of weeks these days. Is this what driving a bit more discussion around indexing in the recent times? Because indexing is not new to this industry. I think we have been
No.
discussing about indexing for 15 years, if not more.
Yeah, I would actually say even more. People tend to think that indexing is new, but again, if I go back to my early days, you had an index called CTS, as I recall it, and I guess it's still around actually. So there's as such nothing new, and I guess I think the best thing you can do as a customer is to look yourself in the mirror and actually have a good long conversation with yourself and your internal stakeholders as to what is important for you. Is it important to, at any given point in time, to be in line with the market? Then obviously index is maybe not the most correct if you want to choose a long-term stability. But if you want to treat rates as an insurance, you know what you are budgeting. I think indexing takes the highs and the lows a little bit out of it, and it offers stability and transparency. But there will be times in the life cycle of an index where the index will not move on the same day as the spot rate moves, and you have to be able to accept that. And the same for the freight forwarder. We have to be able to accept that there will be times where we could purchase a lower rate than the rate we have agreed with the carrier on an index agreement, and that's the nature of index. But it offers a lot of other, you can say, great advantages, not least in terms of transparency and not wheeling and dealing over the last $5, $10, $15. If you are engaged in a customer relationship over 5, 10, 15 years, and there's no motivation on either side to change, why always fight every quarter or every year about these last dollars, and why not let the index guide, you can say, those discussions?
That's an interesting point that you bring in. I want to go down a bit deeper on this one, especially around the operational costs or the operational intensity associated with RFQ for a freight forwarder, because that's something which we're talking about. Like if you have a relationship that is lasting 10 years, 15 years, a long-term relationship, which you do not intend to change, given the service requirements are met, why do you have to dance for 6 months every year?
Yeah, it's a valid point, and I think obviously if you would ask many of our customers, they would say, well, that's our job to make sure that we are in line with market, and obviously if you are the procurement officer of a given company, doing RFQ is basically part of the job description. I think our take is that the index sort of provides another opportunity to make sure that you are in line with market. And we normally tell customers, whether it's our customers or customers that we would like to partner with, that you shouldn't go into an RFQ if you have no willingness to change as such. Otherwise, you're potentially wasting a lot of effort and resources on both sides. And now there are tools, Xeneta being one, that can ensure that you are in line with market, be it short or long term. And I guess that's the power of index, that some indexes, including your own, has achieved a trust that it actually is aligned with market development, and then it's all about getting the initial parameters, you can say, in place, which is probably our number one key point. Make sure you have a good long dialogue when you enter into it, so you don't get a lot of surprises down the road.
That's interesting, right? I think we are looking at stability of relationship as a driver for indexing, and then as an outcome, you get to reduce the cost and effort associated with running RFQs. I'll switch gear a bit. Can you share a bit us about how did it all start for Scan Global? Scan Global is kind of leading in terms of engagement on indexing based on what we see in the market, and I'd love to understand when and how this kind of decision came to place.
It's not like we had a shining light moment where where the world just changed overnight. I think there's always a lot of focus on winning new customers and new business, but at the end of the day, if you're very blunt and honest internally, then the cost of doing that versus developing and increasing existing business is it's simply just better business to make sure that you retain your existing customers. And I think one way of doing that, as I just said, is to have more open, transparent, direct, honest conversations with your customers, and actually ask the question, why are you going into an RFQ again? I want to stress we respect the nature of an RFQ, and sometimes for sure it has a value on both sides. But there will also be times where we see, okay, well, why did this actually end in an RFQ when you had other tools or instruments at your disposal. So I think for us, it's been a natural development. The customer, at the end of the day, we live and die by our existing customers and making sure that we keep them. So I think for us it has been natural because we tend to be constructively annoying towards our customers, being very, very honest in the dialogue that we have with them. And you should not shy away from asking your customer, why are you going to an RFQ? If we potentially have an index solutions that could make sure you still maintain a position where you are in line with market. And so I think it's been a gradual normal behavior from our side, at least on the customer side. Then in the later years, it has also come on the supplier side, i.e. the carriers from our perspective.
There are two interesting dynamics there, right? I want to talk a bit about how does this conversation goes with a customer, like when you introduce them to the idea of indexing or proposed indexing, how does this conversation go typically? Are there patterns or are there industries which are more open to indexing versus others? I would love to know more about that.
Yeah, first and foremost, I think it's also important to understand it's not a one-size-fits-all. There might be parts of the supply chain or the volumes that are perfectly fit for an index, and some trade lanes are also, to be very blunt, more relevant from an indexing perspective than others. So that's the first conversation. Where does it actually make sense? And then very, very quickly, you need to get to a detailed level, because there is, of course, the risk that the industry yet again sort of ends up treating index as a negotiation tool. I wouldn't say abusing it, but trying to sway it in your favor. And that's why you very, very quickly need to get into the details to understand what it is and what it is not, to understand the rules of the game. We have regular QBRs with our you can say larger customers and the ones we have long term. And there it's a natural thing to touch upon the rate development. And as such, we are always prepared to enter into an index agreement, but not at any cost. I would say 80% of the time goes on discussing these initial parameters to make sure there are no, you can say, unpleasant surprises down the road. We have some, you can say, some insights we have put on paper in terms of do's and don'ts when it comes to indexing, which is our take on it. And obviously then we are fully aware that our customers also have their insights on it. I see Xeneta as a neutral player in this regard. And actually at times we have used Xeneta as a blind third party that can help us with understanding what are we actually looking at and what are the underlying data here. If we just treat it, if I normally tend to say that all customers they would like to think that they're in the low range when we look at the index, and you can of course conversely argue that freight forwarders would argue that all customers should be from mid to high. Statistically, that's not possible. So already there's a good discussion. Where do you actually see yourself on the index, and what's your self perception, and some of those discussions that we would like to have very early, and therefore also not indexing at all cost.
That makes sense. Like setting up the expectations from the beginning and being detail oriented right from the beginning so that you understand the rules of engagement clearly between the buyer and supplier makes it so much easier. Otherwise, there'll be times when you revise and then that's when you start unearthing some of the things which you didn't agree in the first place.
It seems simple when you just log in, but there's as you well know, there's a lot of underlying, you can say, parameters that will guide what rate level is the right one. There are also and again, it's also fair to say there are other things we negotiate than just freight. We have demurrage and detention. We have other things that we negotiate. So the rate, the ocean rate or the air freight rate is just one component.
I'll just go back to one of the points you made. Like you said, you have Can Global's take on do's and do nots of index practices. Would love to understand how do you scale this understanding of indexing across your internal organization? As a freight forwarder, you are generally distributed across geographies. How do you drive understanding within your organization about something which is new and can have nuances?
We are on an everlasting journey almost, also because you guys on a very frequent basis come with new functionalities and new additions to the platform. From an organization perspective, we have appointed a global lead and a number of super users, and there's no doubt, and I think we can even improve further. There's no doubt we can still improve in terms of equipping and dressing up our sales force. We have probably concluded that it's hard to educate, let's say, plus 500 salespeople in all the details of an index agreement. So from a commercial perspective, we wish that our sales teams understand what it is not, when would it be relevant, but the details we would like to leave to what we call the product team. So they are to be pulled in rather fast if the conversation goes into something more concrete. So that's the way we have decided to do it from an organization perspective. And the only way to scale it is constant awareness, tracking the usage of Xeneta internally. There will always be those who, if you're not comfortable with the product, it's simply just harder to sell it. So that there's a lot of time spent on internal education and awareness. And we have tasked our product teams with you can say, engaging with our commercial teams to ensure that they use Xeneta and as part of their commercial activities.
So there is like twofold approach. There is centralized expert team which jumps into the conversation and pulled into the conversation by the commercial team, where the basic awareness is developed through education and other materials.
Yeah, I think initially I probably had a dream that we could educate every single salesperson around the globe. But again, if I have to be honest to myself, when I just say that this is more complex than what it might seem to be, then we also have to be realistic that it's not possible to train every single commercial/salesperson into the details of how an index works. And I think most customers will also respect that. So we pull in the experts once it gets into a concrete dialogue, either during an RFQ, but it's also important to underline a lot of the magic happens within the period of RFQs. Once you're in the RFQs, it tends to be sort of a steady motion of how things will progress. If you want to address indexing proactively as a freight forwarder, you need to have those conversations well ahead of an RFQ. And also, if you want to impact the parameters of what index is being used, is it short or long term, etc., then you need to have the dialogue in between.
God, let's switch the track a bit on the other side of the equation. Like, how does things change with your procurement from the carriers? Like, how does that equation changes with indexing?
Yeah, if I go all the way back, you started by saying almost how old I am and how long I've been in the industry. There were a few carriers back then, if I recall, in the early 2000s that were okay with indexing. But overall, I've always, for a long period, seen that carriers were sort of a little bit adverse to indexing. That has changed, and I think Xeneta, you can even see it on your yearly summits that the carrier presence is much more visible right now or these days than what it used to be. So we are seeing across most carriers, I wouldn't say all, an increased interest in index deals. And so that has changed, and for that simple reason, we also have more index deals with carrier today than what we used to. The same, you can say, talking points that I just shared goes for that side of the equation. You need to be equally clear on the do's and the don'ts, and the more detailed parameters of what you're actually discussing. Is it including ETS? Is it excluding ETS? Etc. There could be many things that you want to discuss with a carrier, just as one example. So it has increased, but again, similar to the customer side, it's not at all cost. From our side, it offers us a nice stability on behalf of our customers, and we hope that it will increase. The warning from my side is just, and I shared that on the summit in Barcelona with Xeneta as well, is that there is a risk from all sides, customers, forwarders, and carriers, that we treat index as a negotiation tool and try to impact it in our own favor. And I think that is potentially part of the game. But if you go back to what the purpose of an index is, it is to offer transparency and a neutralized, you can say, baseline for negotiations. So I'm not saying we are any better than anyone else, but it's if asked the questions, I think there's a slight risk that we end up not treating the index in the spirit that it was meant to be. But the good news being we still have time to get more comfortable with this.
That's interesting. I'll just go back to one of the points you made at the beginning of this conversation, which is about more and more carriers getting comfortable with indexing and approaching indexing on more favorable terms. Do you have an hypothesis why this is changing now compared to the pre-old times?
Yeah, I'm not a carrier guy. I used to be for 1 year of my life. Then I switched sides. But obviously, if you own an asset, by definition, you would also like stability. That's my understanding, at least. So while you might want to have a position where you can enjoy the spoils of the spot market, then I think it has become more important than ever as a carrier that you can be guaranteed a number of volumes, and index offers stability. That is one of the main purposes and pros of an index. So I think that's the simple reason why carriers are more open to this today, and they have also seen that customers are more interested in it. So if you want to be customer focused, which most customers do, well, whether you then like it or not, fact remains that there's an increased interest from the customer side. So similar to us, they have to offer it. And again, I think it brings the carrier some much needed stability in a very volatile world.
It's interesting, and I think one of the things I want to talk about is what you mentioned on the potential benefits in terms of stability, alignment of prices versus the potential risk where everyone tries to game the system to their
Yeah.
own advantage. Can you maybe sort of double down a bit more on what are the potential opportunities for the industry as a whole? If you look at all carriers, freight forwarders, and shippers combined, what is the opportunity and what are the risks of sort of going more in the index way? Because we see this happening across all
Yeah.
other commodity-driven industries where they move towards indexing over a period of time. Do you see that happening in our industry?
I don't think there's going to be a revolution. I think it's going to be a slow, steady, progressive adoption of index, and I also favor in general that change happens more on an evolutionary basis rather than so an instant revolution. And again, I don't think the end game has to be the 100% needs to be on index. There will be business or there will be customer segments that are not suited for index. If you ship scrap metal, as an example, then maybe you want to be in the spot market at any given point in time, and you cannot run your business based on an index, and that's all fine. So I think one of the risks being that we oversimplify this and simply say, okay, index is applicable for everything, and that's not how we see it. But we do see, especially with the world that has changed, and it is super volatile, that you take, as I said, the highs and the lows out. And in our experience, it's the highs and the lows that hurt any organization. When the CFO runs down to the chief procurement officer and screams why a rate is as it is compared to spot, then I think it would be in any customer's interest to have at least a significant share of the volume on a more stable agreement. I would almost see it like an insurance almost. And then, as I said, the upsides being, of course, that you can spend more time on other more value-adding discussions as opposed to haggling over those 10, 20, 50, $100. That remains. I was gathered in a room with carriers and customers recently, and you always end up in this evil spiral discussion on both sides, that carriers will increase the rates and not honor agreements, and customers will not honor the volume commitment, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's also why I issue this sort of a little bit of a warning. If we don't treat index in the intention that it was meant to be, then we're missing out on an opportunity, because you guys offer a neutral perspective on rates. By definition, I'm not neutral, and by definition, the customer is not neutral, and by definition, the carrier is not neutral. So the only party that is neutral here in this is the index, and that's why we need to follow those rules of the games that you guys have set out, and whether I then think is right or wrong doesn't matter. It's the rules of the game, and we should follow them jointly. And I think the baseline discussion is probably my number one headache. We see a high interest in using index to regulate rates. We see a very low interest in using the index to set the baseline rate. And that is a little bit of a
concern.
Yeah, it's both a concern and a mystery for me. Of course, I understand why. That's because you want to negotiate it as much as you can on both sides, and then you want the index. If you just apply the simple logic that you believe and trust the index, why wouldn't you use it to set the baseline? And that is probably, or not probably, that is my number one concern and headache when I look at indexing in the dialogue on all sides. And again, we are no better or worse than anyone else in this regard. But that's what I would wish for. It's soon Christmas, so that would be my Christmas wish.
I have a few hundred of indexing conversations throughout the past 12 months, and it's similar conversation that I hear, similar tone. I think again, this is just my interpretation and my hypothesis that it's more of the old habit
Yeah,
rather than anything else. We're used to the idea of negotiating,
you
and
are
then
absolutely right. And I even hear customers saying, yeah, but essentially I'm removing my own job. So if I am a chief procurement officer or head of procurement and I enter into an index, what am I then supposed to spend my time on? And I understand that concerns. And you're very right. We are so used to negotiating through a long, sometimes painful, but also fun. This is what I normally would refer to as self-inflicted pain, where we do so. But we very often end up with the same result. Stay where we are and we find a good middle way on the rate. So I think old habits die hard, as you say. And that's why I see this tendency to wanting to apply the index when it's favorable for you, and less so interest when it is not in your favor. And again, I say this to all concerned parties, including freight forwarders ourselves. So I think you're very right. It's the legacy of it.
it's an evolutionary process where people, once they get into the journey, they figure out that it doesn't matter whether I position to the index versus negotiate hard to get a starting rate. I think it's a matter of time when we reach that point, because essentially your negotiated rate is still a position compared to the market.
Yeah, you still have a position versus market. It's just not one that you're negotiating every day, and it's one that you have had an in-depth discussion around whether it fits to your business, but it's still relative to the market and some decisions that you made for your business in terms of where you would like to be.
We hope to see a day when the negotiation moves beyond just rates, because if it's a 3 month or 6 month RFQ, I think 5.5 months of it is spent on negotiating rates, and it moves to more on the service quality and service parameters.
Yeah.
And that's when greater value can be realized in the relationship. I will switch a bit from here, because I think in the last 15-20 minutes, we have also discussed the role of index being neutral and being transparent and being the one which kind of manages the rules of engagement. And I'd love to understand from a freight forwarder's perspective, what is your expectations from the index? Because it's a trust in the index which drives adoption of index-linked contract.
Yeah.
So what are your what is the characteristics of a good index, and how it should operate?
If you were to measure what I would define as a success criteria for an index, then I would say it is that it matches procurement reality as closely as possible and as fast as possible, and thereby also saying as fast as possible. The delayed effect of an index for me is a given, even for short-term index, because there's a process time on your side and from whenever rates are filed, etc. What becomes unsustainable, and we saw that during COVID, is when the disconnect between what you can procure, then all internal, you can say, hell breaks loose, at least on the customer side, which I can fully understand. No one can afford to overpay. You can afford to be in line with market, a little bit below, a little bit above, but you cannot. No customer can justify that they are paying 800 more, even if they saved 800 the year before. It doesn't really matter, actually. I've always heard carriers say, yeah, but the customers, they saved money last year. Yeah, but that's not the way it works. That was last year. That's why I keep talking about these highs and lows. So the success criteria must be that if you were to take a retroactive look on the index, that it matches as much with the procurement reality as possible. That all surcharges are captured correctly. We live in a world with surcharges, peak season surcharge, Suez Canal surcharge, whatever or you can say due to the conflict in the Red Sea, and the success criteria must be that the index captures all these, because otherwise, what are you looking at? And I know from some in-depth sessions with you guys and also with Eric on your side, how much emphasis you actually put on getting that data right, and how much emphasis you put on actually. There are also rates that you don't put into the index because you don't trust them or you cannot validate them. so you guys, you live and you die by the quality of what you put into the index, because it guides some very, very serious things. It is a lot of money on the table. So I always think the truth on how well you do is when you look back 3-6 months on how did it actually match with the reality on the ground. That for me would be the success criteria for any good index, whether it's you or a different index.
A nice way to summarize that would be the timeliness of the index to reflect the market reality, and
Yes.
how close it is reflecting the market reality are the like two defining criteria for
Yeah.
the index.
Yeah, otherwise it loses its value. You might be able to explain why, but it doesn't really matter, because it sets in motion a lot of other internal conflicts and discussions if it doesn't. And that is, as we see it, unsustainable.
Moving on a bit to the operational side of running and managing index link contracts, like how do you kind of track your portfolio growth or like adoption of index link contracts among your portfolio, or do you even track that?
I don't sit with a daily dashboards of now I increased X% of index agreements. So we don't do that. And again, because I also want to stress, it's not a purpose in itself. We have not put a success criteria on it. So obviously, I have a very good sense from the discussions with the product teams on is this something that we hear more and more and more. So I wouldn't say we don't have a database approach to that, but I do for sure hear index more and more amongst the customer base and also internally. So I would be hesitant to put a number to it, but I can clearly confirm a significant increase in index and also actual index agreement. But as I said, it's going to be an evolutionary journey and not one that is rapid as I see it.
So I just want to bring in another point about executing index link contracts. It brings in a certain amount of operational overhead, like running the calculations of the index every quarter or whatever is the frequency. And once you have more and more of them, then it needs certain amount of tooling and automation to manage all of this. How do you go about doing this today, and how do you foresee it evolving?
Yeah, I think any larger freight forwarder would have you can say what we call a rate management system, and I would say it makes life potentially a little bit easier. I cannot say that it has saved us 50% or 40%, but of course, if you compare to the days where you were negotiating FAC rates on a monthly basis, and that in reality meant that you were basically discussing them every second week because you needed time to actually discuss the next monthly rate. There for sure we are saving time today by having an index that in a timely and accurate manner regulates the rate. Yeah, I said we also save commercial time, I said before, not just operational. I don't know how much we've saved, but we have for sure saved some administration on going into an index deal, no doubt. I would be, I said, cautious to put a number on it.
Thank you so much, Mads, for sharing this. And I have like one last question before we move to the fun end part of it. Like any freight forwarder who is considering indexing and trying to dive into indexing as part of their engagements, what would your advice for them?
Yes, so there's an advice and there's a slight warning. If I start with the warning and repeating it, it is stop potential abusing it and be super transparent and honest. And I know sometimes freight forwarders will be accused of always trying to negotiate everything in this world, but the second you take the step towards indexing is because you have a customer relationship that guides that you can have those discussions and that honesty and trust between two parties. And that requires something on both sides to maintain that level of trust. As for the advice, that is to be very, very clear on the internal rules of engagement and of course the external rules of engagement, and put them on paper, because again, what might seem simple at first glance in your head, our experience is that it becomes more complex when you deep dive into it. So put it in writing. What is your definition of an index agreement? And also, when should an index agreement be on the table and when is it relevant? Because again, it might not be a fit for all customers. So I would also say stop chasing it as a goal in itself, but have a good understanding of when and when not does it add value to the customer relationship.
That's fair, right? Also, do not use it just for your advantage. No. Understand it for real and plan the execution rather than just jumping into it blind.
And then I said the joint advice would be, I hope we can use index and specifically also Xeneta as a guidance for where the baseline is and not just regulation of the rate. That remains my number one wish.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for sharing with us. I hope this is going to help the community to understand things better. And I think an operator's views and experience is for everyone to learn from. I have something which I'm going to take slightly away from logistics, supply chain. I would like, I'm going to ask you, if not logistics, what Matt would be doing?
Yeah, my childhood dream was to be a journalist, actually. That's probably not my dream. My dream would be to run a football club. So I think when if you could combine passion with business, that would probably be my dream. It's probably also a very painful job, but as I said, I'm afraid forward, so I'm used to self-inflicted pain. So yeah, if I could run the football club, a football club, then I would probably be a happy man at some point.
I can see you run a football club with the challenges are not very different. There is customer expectation and there is expectation from the club
Yes,
business and
exactly.
operational
Yeah.
expectations.
So that must be the dream.
Thank you so much for sharing such a candid view from the forwarder seat. It's not often we hear this level of honesty about what it takes to balance both sides of the freight industry. For our listeners, I hope this conversation helped you understand how to build and execute index link contracts and how they're reshaping how forwarders like Scan Global operate, build trust, and compete in a more transparent market. If you haven't already, check out our previous episode with Maersk for the carrier's perspective and stay tuned for our upcoming sessions as we continue to explore how data and technology are redefining global freight industry. Hit subscribe, join the debate, and let's move the industry forward together. I am Rajesh Bhol from Xeneta. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next one.